Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to learn about Python conditional statements. What are conditional statements? Conditional statements are statements that perform certain type of computations or actions based on certain conditions which will evaluate to true or false. These conditions are known as Boolean conditions. There are three main types of conditional statements. There's the if statements, the elif statements, and the else statements. What are if statements? If statements are used to check conditions before executing a certain block of code. They help make your programs make smarter decisions, and they will only run or execute the code inside the if block only when the condition evaluates to be true. If statements use comparison and logical operators to check whether conditions are true or false. I have created a new notebook, and inside this cell I have some code here to illustrate how the if statements work. So you write an if statement using the if keyword. So I have a couple of variables here. Variable A has a value of 40, variable B has a value of 80. So I'm using the if statement here to check if variable B is greater than A. Now that is the condition. So the greater than sign is what we use to check the condition. So B has 80 and A has 40. So B is definitely greater than A. So that condition will evaluate to true. So the code inside the if block. So when you write an if statement, you have the colon, and then underneath the colon is the block of code that will execute when the condition is true. So this print function here will execute this code that says B is greater than A because that condition is true. If the condition was false, nothing will happen. The code will not execute. So let me run the code by clicking on the run command. You can see it's executed the code inside the if block, which is this text that says B is greater than A. What are elif statements? Elif statements are used to check multiple expressions until they find a condition that is true. When they do find a condition that is true, it will only execute the block of code as soon as one of the conditions evaluates to true. So if you're checking for a few conditions, it will execute the code it finds for the first conditions that evaluates to true. I have a block of code inside my second cell to illustrate how the if statement works. So I have two variables. Variable A has a value of 40. Variable B has a value of 40. So they both have the same value. So I've got an if statement which is checking is B greater than A. So if B is greater than A, the code inside the if block, which is a print statement, will execute. In this condition, the condition is false because both of them have the same value. So that code inside the if block will not execute. And then we have the code in the elif block, which is checking. So I'm using a comparison operator to check. If you have a double equals to, that means you're checking is something is equals to another. So I'm checking is A equals to B. We know that they are because they both have the same value. So the code inside the elif block will execute because that condition is true. They both are equals to each other. So let me run this cell and you will see that the code inside the elif block is the one that is being executed, which is this print statement that says A and B are equal. What are else statements? Else statements are used to execute a block of code when conditions evaluate only to false. Added some block of code here into this new cell to illustrate how the else statement works. So I have two variables. Variable A has a value of 20. Variable B has a value of 10. I've got an if statement to check if variable B is greater than A. If it is, the code inside the if block of statements, which is a print statement, will execute. In this case, B is less than 20, so that will evaluate to false, so that code will not execute. We move on to the elif code. In the elif, we're checking is A is equals to B. This will evaluate to false, so that code block will not execute. We move on to the else statement, which is going to evaluate to true because A is greater than B. So that code will execute. So let me run the code and you'll see it's saying A is greater than B because that is the only condition that is true. We also have what is called a nested if statement, which is basically an if statement embedded inside another if statement. I have added a block of code into this cell to illustrate how the nested if statement works. So I've got a variable x, which has a value of 51. And I've got my first if statement, which is checking if x is greater than 10. That is going to evaluate to true. So the statement, which is the print statement above 10, is going to be printed. And then we have the second if statement, which is embedded inside the first one, which is checking if x is greater than 20. That is going to evaluate to true. So the print statement, which says above 20, is going to be executed. All right. So we have two statements that evaluate to true. So if I run that, we should have two printouts. The first one says above 10, which is for this one, and the second says above 20, which is for that. So that's basically how the nested if statement works. So in this video, we've learned about Python conditional statements. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.